One day I was sent out to a local mall with the cover of Vanity Fair magazine. I don't know if you recall, but there was a cover with Demi Moore. She was visibly very pregnant and almost naked. Back then, that was a big deal. And so I was basically sent out to get man on the street reaction. And this was like a turning point for me. And I just decided like that wasn't really what I wanted to do. And I started thinking about people who are really more directly working to further social justice. And I did remember talking to people like Cesar, even though I didn't remember that he was connected with Latino justice, and that they were so inspiring that I thought that was the better career path. And it was absolutely the case. I really found my true vocation in working as a civil rights litigator.
Hi, and thank you for joining us on another episode of the Latina Leadership Series. I am your host. My name is Angelica Casares. And on today's episode, I have Lourdes. Lourdes, let's see if I can pronounce this right. Rosado?
Yes.
Am I right? Okay, good.
Absolutely.
Good. Lourdes. So usually I allow my guests an opportunity to introduce themselves. One of the things that I definitely like to ask is, who are you? And how did you get there? Where do you come from? How did you appear?
Absolutely. Well, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for having me here.
Absolutely.
So my name is Lourdes Rosado. I am president and general counsel of Latino Justice Pearl Def. The Pearl Def stands for the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, which is the name we started with back in the 1970s. We changed our name to Latino Justice around 2008 to reflect that we were serving the broader, not only Puerto Ricans, but the broader Pan-Latino community throughout the United States.
Okay.
And I am interesting how I got here. I actually didn't ever think about being a lawyer. I'm a civil rights litigator for the last 25 plus years. But when I was in school, I really wanted to be a journalist. And I actually started working as a teenager and a college student. I worked for a startup newspaper here in New York City. As a writer. I'm actually on the board right now. It's a nonprofit organization, and 40 years later, I'm on the board. And funny story, back in the day, one of the assignments I had was to report and write up a story profiling a young Puerto Rican lawyer who had been involved in starting up a nonprofit organization to really defend the rights of Puerto Ricans and other Latinos living in the New York City area. And I did that profile. And I just figured out in the last month or so that I profiled one of the founders of Latino Justice, of Pearl Def, Cesar Perales, back then. This was in 1984. So even though I wanted to be a journalist back then, I think subconsciously I may have been really looking for this. What became my true career was as a civil rights litigator, social justice litigator. So I followed in his footsteps and have been doing that work for now almost 3 decades.
So it sounds like you were going from journalism. Did he inspire you to change career paths, or was it something he said in that interview?
I think he talked a lot about, he really encouraged young people to think about careers and to promote social change. And when I was pursuing a career in journalism, I thought about writing and communications as a vehicle for social change. And it very much is, but I just sort of felt as I reached a certain point in my journalism career, and I did work as a journalist and in publishing for a number of years before deciding to go to law school. I remember having this, what I call my Demi Moore moment. So I was a senior editorial assistant at Newsweek magazine in the late 1980s, and I was doing some reporting on issues that I thought were important. But one day I was sent out, I was reporting out of our Houston bureau. One day I was sent out to a local mall with the cover of Vanity Fair magazine. I don't know if you recall, but there was a cover with Demi Moore. She was visibly very pregnant and almost naked. Back then, that was a big deal. And so I was basically sent out to get man on the street reaction. And this was like a turning point for me. I just decided like that wasn't really what I wanted to do.
Mhm.
And I started thinking about people who are really more directly working to further social justice.
Mhm.
And I did remember talking to people like Cesar, even though I didn't remember that he was connected with Latino justice, and that they were so inspiring that I thought that was the better career path. And it was absolutely the case. I really found my true vocation in
Mhm.
working as a civil rights litigator.
Okay. So on here, I like to take the listeners back a little bit, back
Mhm.
into like much more of your presence as a child or in your teenhoods, where we
Mhm.
kind of solidify who we start to become as an adult. How was that for you? Were you born and raised there in Philadelphia, New York? Like somewhere in New England were you born? What did you do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm a native New Yorker. My
Okay.
father, I'm from a mixed marriage. My father is, and his side of the family is from Ponce, Puerto Rico.
Okay.
And my mother's from Havana, Cuba. They both came here when
Wow.
they were teenagers. They met here and married when they were fairly young. So I was born and raised here. I'm a first generation, very much a product of the New York City public schools. I lived in Brooklyn and Queens. Had a really good experience in the New York schools back in the 70s and early 80s when I was a student. Had fabulous teachers and who were really inspiring and who really just told me that I could go as far as I wanted to go
Yeah.
in terms of school and career. So, and at a young age, I was very much a writer. I loved writing stories. I loved keeping journals, whether it was fiction, and then getting involved in this teen paper later was, really fundamentally another pivot point for me. I just really loved writing. I love publishing stories and talking about really political issues, social issues of the day.
Mhm.
So that was really what motivated me to first go into journalism, but later it made total sense for me to become a lawyer because lawyers share a lot of the same skill sets as journalists. We all
Mhm.
have to learn about new areas very quickly, right? We have
Mhm.
to, if you're whether you're reporting on a story or working on a case, you're usually trying to bone up on a new subject area very quickly and understand it. You need to be able to work well under deadlines. You need to be a storyteller. You have to tell narratives about
Yeah.
what's going on in the world. So there was a lot of shared skills that go between the two professions that made it a natural fit for me to go to work more directly in on behalf of people who were confronting discrimination and bias mostly in their lives.
I definitely do want to touch up on that a little bit, but one of the things that I want to mention here. So I'm from Houston, Texas. And
Mhm,
I've heard a lot about the New York school system and how it was back in the
mhm.
80s, even as early as like the early 90s. How it impacted its community and it definitely educated its community. Um
Mhm.
would you put an emphasis like how it made a difference for you, and now that you're grown up, how you hear the stories of other people from other places, what was the advantage for you being there in the New York school system, and how that affects its community obviously, but the teachers or how they organize, or how the school system itself does its justice to the actual um residents.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that the school system that I went through was a lot less segregated
Okay.
than the school system today in New York City is one of the most segregated in the country, if not the most segregated. So I would say, when I was going to school in the 1970s, believe it or not, it was less segregation. There was more
Mhm.
diversity, and it's a really sad thing because but I also think that part of the reason that I had a positive experience was because my mother, when we were young, we were living in Red Hook, Brooklyn, which
Mhm.
now is a really fashionable neighborhood. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, it was not. It was mostly a neighborhood of factories and loading docks. And she was really nervous about sending me to school, walking to school,
Mhm.
in the neighborhood. So we moved out to Woodside, Queens, which is a working class neighborhood. And I went to a great public school there where that was, again, a little bit more diverse than the typical public school you would find
Mm-hmm.
now, wasn't as segregated. And because of what great teachers there, I got into a gifted and talented program in junior high school. And because of that great program that I was in, I got into Stuyvesant High School, which is one of the three major magnet schools here.
Mm-hmm.
For kids, you test into it, you take a test. And at Stuyvesant, I was, my teachers didn't talk about us going to college. Our teachers talked to us about going to Ivy League schools. Like that
Mm-hmm.
was the expectation. And I was encouraged by my guidance counselor to apply to these Ivy League schools. So I say that because my mother had the wherewithal to move us,
Mm-hmm.
to this one-bedroom apartment in Woodside, where I think the schools were better than the neighborhood we came from. And because of that, just one moment, I was put on a different path than I think I
Mm-hmm.
would have been. So because the school, again, while they were not as segregated, there were still very big differences in terms of the quality of the education you could get in one neighborhood to another in the city. And I think that's the real challenge that we have right now, and what's so wrong with our school
Mm-hmm.
system here in New York City right now. And in a lot of the world, a lot of the nation, kids like who are Latino, like us,
Mm-hmm.
or Black, tend to go to highly segregated schools that are
Yeah.
also made up of students who are in poverty. And those schools tend to have like bad outcomes for kids, or not great outcomes in terms of graduation rates,
Yeah.
going on to college. So we're confronting a real struggle here in our country right now to make public, access to quality public education a reality for so many children of color.
Yeah. I'm a product of one of those segregated schools that intentionally was segregated. I mean,
Mhm.
I remember the first time that I came into contact with a lot of people of for example, a white teacher was a white teacher. I didn't like that was it. That was my extent of like knowledge of like white people was people that worked either as a teacher in my school
Mhm.
or that was it. That was the extent of it. And it wasn't until
Right.
like I was in my teens until like I was like, oh, there's more to
Yeah.
life than this. I mean, there was, but again, so I thank you for sharing that. I think education starts very young and being able to
Mhm.
uh, have access to different people and different roles and different mannerisms and cultures definitely sets you up a lot more for success later in life.
For sure. And there was even, what you just said now. I mean, not seeing teachers who look like you
Hmm.
can really have an effect on your self-esteem and
Absolutely.
your ambitions. There was a study that came out. I read about it about a month ago that said that proved that children who go to school with other children who are at a higher like socioeconomic class
Hmm.
have better chances of earning more in their
Yeah.
lifetime than those who go again to highly segregated school that have only other children who are at the same income level. It all makes a difference when you're exposed on so many levels to being in diverse integrated schools.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for like sharing that part because definitely part of talking about education here in the Latina Leadership Series is definitely one of the things that I want to start diving into. Thank you for the introduction like that. So, Lourdes, I want to get into like I'm looking at so I read a little bit on you as I do with all my interviewees. Um, I want to get into so you kind of mentioned you became a lawyer, you were a journalist, and kind of became a lawyer. But
Mhm.
looking at this, looking at how I mean program director you juvenile law school I, civil rights in the New York State and Pencil and Philadelphia, how does all of this play into like what you do now there for Latino justice? Like
Oh. Mhm.
yeah, I mean obviously you did an interview and then there was an in between, so that in between, what were you up to? Because
Oh.
it sounds like a lot. It's impressive,
Mhm.
I have to say.
Well, thank you. That's really lovely of you to say, and it's certainly been my life's work to do social justice work. I would say all roads were leading me back to Latino justice because the issue areas that I've spent my career working on are really all at the core of the mission of Latino justice, which is really to seek a more just and equitable society,
Hmm.
and to use and challenge sometimes the rule of law to create to combat discrimination against our
Hmm.
community and to open up pathways to advancement and opportunities and well-being. So I've worked a lot, for example, on issues around the criminal legal system, about
Hmm.
reforming that system dramatically. And now at Latino Justice, we talk a lot about fundamentally transforming that system because
What portion of it would you transform? Like what? What
from
specifically?
beginning to end, from the
Okay.
beginning to the over policing and racial profiling of
Okay.
Black and brown people in this country, it is documented, well documented, that we are
Absolutely.
disproportionately policed and followed. And that draws us into the system, right?
Hmm.
At much higher numbers than our white peers. So that even at the very beginning, when we're talking about being stopped for like a traffic violation or a broken tail light, we know the numbers show that we are our much higher rates are stopped than white people. And that brings us into the system. That initial contact can lead someone down the road to years of involvement in this system. And most, you know, what we also work on is sort of what I call the back end, which is mass incarceration. This country just is addicted to jailing Black and brown people, much higher rates than any other country in the world.
Yeah.
And we are, literally subjecting, thousands and thousands of members of our community to torture. And we're not even building pathways back into the community for them once they have served their time. So we really have here at Latino Justice, we see that, the criminal legal system. I don't even
Hmm.
call it a criminal justice system because I really question if justice is really done there. The
Yeah.
criminal legal system is another form of oppressing the Latino community and keeping us down and keeping us from exercising our true potential, both to achieve success and well-being in our own lives, but also in sort of driving the agenda and the future of this country and our democracy. Just like another issue that we work on here at Latino Justice is voting rights and voter
Hmm.
suppression. And again, another big part of my career before coming here. And, we do so much work, first of all, to uplift and protect voting rights and to defeat voter suppression laws. We've seen this wave of voter suppression laws that are absolutely directly targeted at suppressing um, the vote of people of color. So we've
Hmm.
been challenging laws, like in Florida, we've been challenging a voter suppression law there. We were able to get a really good decision in our SB 90 case in Florida from the district court, the trial court, to
Yeah.
enjoin parts of that law. But then an appeals court had, stayed the injunction, but we're still litigating there. We're here in New York City. We've been defending a law that the New York City Council passed to allow individuals who are not citizens but who have work authorization or
Hmm.
permanent legal residence or DACA recipients to vote in municipal elections. I mean, these are people.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an
That's amazing.
amazing law, and a law that totally makes sense. I mean, the people we're talking
Yeah.
about are raising families here. They are working jobs. They're paying taxes. They should have a right to decide how much money we're going to spend on our schools and how much money to spend on our subways and our buses and all sorts of stuff.
Absolutely. I
It's
think I think if there is an EIN number that represents somebody, that represents a taxpayer, should have that ability to be able to vote based on that EIN number, where their tax money can probably supplement into like different systems. One of the things, Lourdes, that you
Mhm.
mentioned about like keeping suppressing the Latino and Black community, I didn't know this was like a maybe this was a thing or not, but I remember back in high school, one of the things was truancy, right? It was or when you skip school. right?
Mhm.
You didn't really skip school. There was just some things that you had to leave the school for, like if you couldn't afford like the food, right? Like if you didn't
Mm,
get like free food and you couldn't afford the food, some students would do was to go to like the corner store there in New York. We call it bodega, but it was a corner store for us.
right.
And you would just pick up a bag of chips, and but you had to hide from like the truancy
Mm,
officers, and that's one of the ways that they would put you into the system, right?
yeah.
Was a way to keep you monitored, and and it was a reason to like continue to kind of keep up on you, kind of keep as a truancy, as a you were horrible in the school, and you're like, no, I was just trying to feed myself.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
couldn't afford it. So I had to, I had to buy $25 chips as opposed to your dollar chips at the school, and a $50 in Coke can, so I can afford to eat, so I can still be there at school. But it was, and that was the way that I was kept in the kind of like the juvenile. I wasn't like a juvenile delinquent, but I always was in trouble for truancy. I was like, I can't afford to eat here, man. Me and my friends are like put our dollars together and buy like an actual like shrimp fried rice from like down the street, like a
Mhm,
big plate that all of us could eat from. And that was a way to, and it didn't dawn on me. I just figured this is just the path of life. This is what happens all the time. And then as I grew, I started to understand that no, there's actually folks out there who homeschool their kids, and there's kids are out there and out and about at 15, 14 years old, my age, who like took part-time jobs, you
mhm.
know. And I did this was for us, it was truancy. For us, it was you gotta, we have to keep tabs on you,
Hmm,
you know?
interesting.
And so it still happens. It still happens to this day. Not as much anymore. I think there's definitely a lot more. I was going to call it liberty, right? Freedom.
Mhm.
Isn't that funny? The nuance of freedom as as a teenager to be
Right.
able to exist in the world, to visit your friends in the middle of the day. If your classes are over at 1 o'clock, you constantly have to like check in with people, tell people, no, I'm not in school. I'm 11th grade. I'm going to graduate already. Like next year, and I have half a day. Right.
Yeah, no, the
Yeah.
school, there's a lot, we spend a lot of time talking about education in this country, but
Hmm.
we're still not doing enough. We're not doing enough to support kids and support teachers
Yeah.
so that school can be a really meaningful experience. It's September, it's back to school month.
Yeah.
I loved going back to school because, like I said earlier, I had a really positive experience in school. But for a lot of children, school is
Yeah.
not a positive experience either because, they have overcrowded classrooms. They don't, they're embarrassed because they can't afford to eat the
Hmm.
food and buy the food that other kids are buying there, or their schools are being patrolled by
Yeah.
armed, by police officers, and they have to go through metal detectors. It's not a positive experience, and we are still not putting our money where our mouth is in this country and really supporting schools and teachers so that it can be
Yeah.
a positive experience. I one of the groups in schools that are doing the worst are English learners, kids
Hmm.
who speak Spanish or Korean or Chinese at home. There are about 5 million what we call English learners in schools, and almost
Hmm.
4 million of those students are Spanish speaking students. And even though there's some legal protections in the law for them and some monies that are allocated, we as a country are still failing these kids because they're not, their
Massively.
graduation rates
Yeah.
are low compared to every other group. So we need to be spending more time focusing on them as well. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things that Latino Justice was founded 50 years ago. It's our 50th anniversary. 50 years ago, we three Puerto Rican lawyers got together, and the reason they
Hmm.
started the organization because they wanted to sue, and they did sue the New York City Board of Education
Hmm.
for failing to provide bilingual education to Spanish-speaking kids in New York City, and got an incredible settlement consent decree where the city was, affirmed that they would provide bilingual classes to students, and it really paved the way to establishing the rights we have for kids today to get that
Yeah.
education. But in a lot of ways, those are rights that are on paper, and we're still not providing the level of support to English learners that we absolutely need to in order not only to ensure good outcomes for them and productive pathways to adulthood. But also as a country, we want multilingual children and
Yeah.
adults. Like that's how you're competitive as an economy. Like we
Yeah.
want people speaking multiple languages, but we still haven't gotten there yet. And so that's work
Yeah.
that Latino Justice is doing, is try to make sure that we bring the English learners along in terms of support for their success in school.
I would like to think that that the government of any state, city, or at a national level, that they submit, right? But a lot of the times, they're forced.
Yeah.
They're forced into these things. So I just wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask you
Yeah.
about Latino justice.
So we're working on so much stuff right now. We work on a variety of issues. Basically, we do voting rights and voter protection. So we have a Cada Voto Cuenta election protection program where we deploy bilingual poll monitors to be the eyes and ears on the ground to ensure that all voters, including voters who don't speak English as their first language, actually have access to the ballot box. We're targeting areas with larger populations of Spanish-speaking folks, like here in New York and Florida, Georgia, Pennsylvania. And so we're doing a lot of that work. It's ongoing work, but of course we're gearing up for the midterm elections in November,
Yeah.
and recruiting volunteers to help us with that work. I
So where
mentioned
can we find you?
Oh, yeah. You can just go to our website, www.latinojustice.org, to learn more about Cada Voto Cuenta
Cada
and
voto cuenta.
what we're doing and how you can become involved or how you can use our resources. Another thing we're working on, like I said, we are defending this New York City law that allows non-citizens who have who are other types of documentation to be in the country to vote in municipal elections. Unfortunately, a group of people who are challenging that law, and it's actually been stayed right now, so it's on appeal. We're working on defending that law because we absolutely think that these folks should have the right to direct what happens to the monies that they contribute as taxpayers to the New York City economy. We're also working on a big case that is going up before the Supreme Court of the United States. It's going to be argued actually on Halloween, October 31st. There's a big case about affirmative action in higher education.
Mm-hmm.
Folks are suing Harvard and the University of North Carolina. And basically, what we're trying to do is defend the longstanding practices of universities to use tailored race-conscious admissions policies to bring in diverse classes of youth. Without these, we've already seen in some states that have eliminated these kinds of race-conscious admissions practices, like California, that the diversity of the student body plummets dramatically when you don't
Yeah.
have these kind of race conscious policies. And there are a lot of folks that want to see that eliminated. And that's really, going to be bad, very bad for our community, the Black community.
For
If
their future. Yeah.
school is going to look a lot different. So we're working on, a lot of stuff. We defend workers from exploitation and abuse by employers. We defend access to schools by immigrant youth. We're challenging racial profiling by police. We just do anything that Latinos identify as critical to their well-being and success. That's where we're at Latino Justice. We're there to help and scaffold our communities so that they can reach their true potential.
I have to say, Lourdes, you got me all wild up. My heart is like beating listening to all these amazing, these things that like, and especially in education, again, higher education. Oh my God, the Latina higher education, that you see the numbers, you've heard of them, right? They
Yeah.
go in, they drop out immediately. It's like, well, how, okay. So I definitely understand. I do want to I'm wary of your time. But is there anything that I didn't touch on that you would like to either advocate into or say?
I just wanted to let people know, as I said earlier, this is Latino Justice Pearl Duff's 50th anniversary. We've been around for 50 years.
Congratulations.
So we're very excited. We've been doing a year-long series of events. We've been doing receptions in various cities where we have worked on around the country. We're having a big alumni event on September 29th for people who are alumni of our leadership programs. We've had leadership programs where we have created the pipeline of Latino youth into the legal profession. We're doing, and then we're culminating all this in a big gala that's going to happen on November 10th in New York City at the Chelsea Piers, and to celebrate just 50 years of a bold legacy and a bolder future. So we welcome people to join us in one or more of these events.
Awesome. Thank you, Lourdes, for taking the time to talk to me today. Again, I know you're busy.